Before the Pope leaves the Mass site, he will greet 30 handicapped or disabled individuals who have been brought to the Mass. It has been a beautiful, unparalleled, historic, flawless, I can't think of enough adjectives, celebration of the Holy Eucharist at Westover Hills. Took about 2 hours, a little less than the 2.5 hours that had been anticipated. If you wondered who those two gentlemen were immediately behind the pontiff carrying bags, they were the Vatican doctors who trail him only by mere feet, as he is anywhere. Dr. Joaquin Navarro-Valls and Dr. Renato Bussinetti.
The Pope is now going to go to the mobile homes that have been built for him. They are now the sacristy, where he will change. That's where he put on the vestments for the Mass. He will now change, and according to the itinerary, will depart in a motorcade, not a parade, but a motorcade, where he is expected to meet for lunch with Texas bishops at Assumption Seminary. The choir finishing up the official welcoming hymn for John Paul II.
Competing with the PA system, where you can already hear announcements for the various bus routes being made as the assembled get ready to disassemble.
And the folks from Austin making their presence known.
Here's one of the 30 disabled we mentioned earlier.
That's a tradition with the Pope, as I understand, that after a service he will often meet with disabled people. They are given a special location where he can pass by.
And with that resolve, it would appear the first papal Mass in the history of San Antonio has concluded just 12 miles west of the downtown in a place that 3 or 4 months ago was a field populated only by mesquite and fire ant mounds.
A couple of notes on the Mass, on the service. 2 mentions of the tower disaster of Thursday night. Archbishop Patrick Flores, in greeting the Pope, said the towers collapsed, but the Church of Texas is standing. And at the end of the service, John Paul himself mentioned the damage and told the group he appreciated all the efforts to rebuild, and he understood their disappointment. Father James Sullivan with us from the Oblate School of Theology. Your thoughts on the Mass? I know one thing, he inserted a prayer, John Paul did, that is not usually in the Eucharist. Tell us about that.
Well, right before the concluding rites of the Eucharist, Deborah, Pope John Paul led the people in the Angelus. The Angelus is a prayer of devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary, an ancient prayer in the Church. The Holy Father always, when he's in Rome, leads the people in St. Peter's Square in the Angelus from his study window or from the balcony of St. Peter's. So it is just in keeping with that practice that on a Sunday he would lead the people, but also I think it's a sign of his personal devotion to the Blessed Virgin Mary. As you know, he spoke for a few moments on the Virgin Mary and her place in Catholic devotion, and he also mentioned that these countries are under the title patroness of Mary, and he mentioned Our Lady of Guadalupe.
In terms of what was said in the homily, personally speaking, any disappointments for things that weren't mentioned or language that wasn't used?
Well, Bob, one thing we didn't discuss earlier was the Pope's emphasis on the return to the sacrament of reconciliation. And I think all the clergy in the Church and all the faithful would applaud a greater consciousness of our need for reconciliation and perhaps more frequent approach to the sacrament. My only disappointment was that the language that he used was not very cogent, or at least not any more cogent than that kind of pronouncement that we hear coming out of Rome. The Catholics should come back to the sacrament of reconciliation.
You didn't feel it challenged Catholics in a relevant enough sort of way?
That's right. I wish that the language had been more in keeping with our understanding of what reconciliation means and the sacrament means.
Pointedly, though, reconciliation even is a point of some contention, at least within the church here in the United States, and specifically the granting of general absolution. Archbishop Hunthausen of Seattle was, for, among other things, stripped of his archbishopric powers earlier on in the year because he was, in a mass sort of way, dispensing absolution. The Vatican doesn't buy that. The Vatican says it has to be done on an individual basis, by a priest in a confessional with a parishioner.
There are three rites for the celebration of the Sacrament of Reconciliation. And the first and the most recommended is the individual's approach to the confessor, confession of sins, and reception of absolution. However, there's also the rite where people come together, pray together, and then approach the priest individually. And finally, the rite where absolution may be given to a large number of people. Now, this is reserved for cases of necessity, when there might not be enough priests to hear the individual confessions, or where people might be faced with imminent harm, for instance, as soldiers going into battle. But I think our experience in the church in the United States is that some parishes have found that people respond to the celebration of the Sacrament of Reconciliation in common, and more have come if we have given general absolution. Now, they don't neglect or abandon the practice of individual confession. So this is something that the Holy Father obviously believes strongly in, the right of individual reconciliation, and he has reiterated that position of the Church today. And again, no one of us in ministry would disagree with the importance of individual reconciliation. But some of us do wonder if we can't combine that with sometimes having people come together for reconciliation in common.
We saw a security helicopter there. I believe that was the San Antonio police helicopter, which would indicate to me that the motorcade is imminent.
Something else to mention before we turn our thoughts away from the Mass is that John Paul's visit to the United States, as his visits to any country are, is intended to unify the church. And something we may have failed to mention is that this theme of reconciliation that was present in the Mass here at Westover Hills was followed in Catholic churches throughout the world. Today, on this Sunday, all Catholic churches had the theme of reconciliation, not because the Pope was doing it here in San Antonio, but because it is on the Catholic liturgical calendar. And so we saw in this service all the readings, the psalm, the homily by the Pope, all on that theme of reconciliation, and the entire church around the world is participating in that today.
That's right, Deborah. We are united both in the word that we hear and in the Eucharist that we celebrate, no matter where that word is being heard or the Eucharist is being celebrated. I think we also see John Paul II as universal pastor, the person who has united all of San Antonio on this day, even though there are dissensions and divisions.
We are going to go out to the Mass site and join Hollis Grizzard and Lisa Rudolph. Hollis, Lisa?
Deborah, you know, one observation I had during the homily was that part of the Pope's goal in coming to the Hispanic heartland, if you will, of the Southwest, was to emphasize the need to make Hispanics feel that they are part of the church, more a part of the Catholic Church than apparently some have felt, given the growing incidence of Hispanic Catholics converting to Protestant and other faiths. I was curious what Father Sullivan, what his interpretation would have been, especially at the part of the homily when the Pope called for a return to the church. I saw an interpretation of that as maybe a message to some of these Hispanic Catholics who have been straying a bit from Catholic Church.
Father Sullivan, Lisa is asking about what the Pope said to Hispanics as far as straying from the church. That brings up the question also, a big spectacle like this, a big production, a huge Mass, a historic event, does it really have any effect? Does it have a lasting effect once the Pope is gone?
That's a question that will have to be answered down the road, Deborah. I think when the Pope said that the Hispanic community itself faces the greatest challenge, he was challenging the community to make the faith alive and relevant to its own people. I think one of the reasons that Hispanics have been going to other churches other than the Roman Catholic Church is that they find them smaller and they find more of community spirit there. And as we all know, the family is of great value to the Hispanics. They're a close-knit people, and they find that family atmosphere in some of the smaller Christian communions.
Do you, as a priest and speaking for your fellow priests, feel challenged to try and make the Catholic Church, that particular form of worship, more personal to Hispanics? Because an interesting statistic that we read was that 8 out of 10 Hispanic Catholics had been approached for conversion by other churches. And there are some estimates that as many as 25% of Hispanic Catholics have left, and many of them go to the evangelical style of churches. They are very aggressive in pursuing, in converting, if you will. So do you feel challenged by the Pope's words to make the religion more relevant, or whatever needs to be done to keep the Hispanics within the church?
Well, I have to make it clear that I'm not in parochial ministry. I'm not in a parish, and I only hear what my brother priests and brother and sister ministers tell me about the Hispanic ministry. So I'm not an expert in this field, but I think we all are challenged to make the church more of a living community, not just in its liturgy, but in its outreach to all its members and making every person in the parish feel a part of that parish.
All right, the mass exodus, I think we can use that expression literally, is underway. Lisa and Hollis Grizzard are observing. Lisa, Hollis?
We also have some updated information now on some of the medical cases from when we earlier spoke with you, Deborah. We now have a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 people. Eight people total that have been taken to area hospitals. And the massed helicopter that we saw depart about 15 to 20 minutes ago, there were actually 3 patients in that helicopter. 2 of the people were suffering from heat-related maladies. We would anticipate it would be fairly serious since one of them was packed in ice. There was also another individual besides the 2 that were suffering from possible heat stroke. There was another individual that had a fractured elbow from a fall. He simply happened to be there as the mass helicopter took off, so they put him on that helicopter to go to the other, to go along to the hospital. There have been, since we also spoke with you last, another 2 or 3 ambulances enter the Red Cross Clearing Center over there. We understand that those ambulances now have transported 3 additional patients to area hospitals, 1 for a fractured leg and 2 also for heat-related illnesses of some sort, either heat exhaustion or heat stroke. It does appear rather unusual, the number that we did have at least 2 patients that had fractures, a fractured leg and a fractured elbow, and we also reported to you earlier we had a serious cut from somebody falling down. The ground, although they did go to great lengths out here to try and prepare it for the Mass, the ground is still fairly rugged. It's still fairly rocky, and so if somebody was not careful and was straying off the paths that have been carved out here at the Mass site, it is quite possible to twist an ankle or fall out here. So that's the latest on the medical injuries that have occurred out here at the Mass site. And as you said, the Mass exodus continues, and hopefully we won't have too many more medical emergencies of that nature before everybody is able to get safely back on the road.
Considering how many people were out here, at the last estimate there were between 250 and 300,000, though, it seems like there were relatively few injuries. Of course, there were those few serious injuries that Hollis just spoke of, but by and large, a couple of the people that I have talked to, officials circulating around and ushers, say they were surprised that there were as few incidents as there have been.
I would have to agree with that, considering the number of people out here. Now, Pope John Paul II headed over to the Chancery, where he has a 150 meeting with Texas bishops. We understand that our Kathy Teague is there live now. Kathy?
That's exactly right. The Texas bishops, about 50 of them, will be arriving here very shortly and be having lunch with Pope John Paul II. Of course, we've all been talking about over the last few days how that menu has been kept secret. Even though the menu in New Orleans was printed on the first page there, here in San Antonio, security decided to keep it a secret, although most people are saying that it will probably be a very traditional Texas meal. It will be probably some chicken tacos, maybe even a chicken fried steak, and something that normally we would be sitting down and eating on a Sunday afternoon. That's what the Texas bishops will be sharing with Pope John Paul II. After he meets with them and they present a gift to him, it will be a rest period for the Pope. This is going to be one of the few times during the day when he is going to be shielded from the public for any period of time. He will have about an hour and 15 minutes, we understand, to refresh himself, to relax a little bit, and then it's on to the parade later on this afternoon. Out on Woodlawn Street, right here in front of the Catholic Chancery and Assumption Seminary, people have already started lining up, and from what I understand, there may be several thousand people lining the 4.5-mile route from Assumption Seminary down to Municipal Auditorium in order to greet the Pope. As we've mentioned throughout the day, the various parishes have set up displays along the Woodlawn Lake neighborhood so that he can see some of their examples of local parish life. Some of the biggest displays are from the Vietnamese community here in San Antonio, as well as St. Leo's, San Juan Capistrano. Several of the other communities have put up their various displays trying to give the Pope a little more of a flavor, just as much of as they can, of San Antonio, so that he can keep all of these memories with him as he goes on and visits some of the other Texas cities. As I told you, the meeting here, though, is going to be very quiet, very brief, just a lunch, and then a rest period. Later on tonight, he will be returning to the Chancery, and that is, of course, where he will be meeting with 1,000 people of Polish descent. He talked about them earlier today during the Mass, made a special mention of Panna Maria. I'm sure all the Polish people from that community in South Texas are very excited that they've already heard and been recognized by the Pope in the message during the Mass. He will be going from Assumption Seminary at about 4 o'clock, as I mentioned, on a parade route to Municipal Auditorium, where John Kirby is standing by live for a meeting with the Catholic Charities in town.
Kathy, there are not a lot of people out here outside Municipal Auditorium at this hour. That's going to change in a little bit. Already there are people staking out their positions around Municipal Auditorium, waiting to catch a glimpse of the Pope. He will be leaving here at about 5:45 to go over to San Fernando Cathedral. Before he does that, he will be the first Pope in history to address the Catholic Charities in their 77-year history. They've had 73 meetings. Right now, they're beginning the afternoon session inside Municipal Auditorium here. They're expected to hear a message from John Paul, a message of giving more, of acting more, of doing more as members of Catholic Charities. Just what is Catholic Charities? Well, we'll get into that a little bit more later on, and it may not be fair to draw comparisons, but it's really kind of a Red Cross with a social services arm in terms of a ministry arm. They provide marriage counseling, counseling for people who need help, but they also provide disaster relief. So Catholic Charities covers a wide range of issues as it's existed since 1910 as a formal entity called Catholic Charities. And believe me, as people are filing in for this afternoon's meeting, they are really looking forward to the address of Pope John Paul, and we will be here throughout the afternoon to bring you up to date on what he has to say inside Municipal Auditorium. Let's go back to Bob and Deborah.
Okay, so the Pope will be downtown at the Municipal Auditorium in a matter of hours, but right now he's leaving the Mass site. Let's take a look at what the pictures look like from the Mass site. As he gets in his motorcade, he'll travel about 10.5 miles to Assumption Seminary. Do we have those pictures?
There he goes.
There he is. This will be a pretty quick trip. It's my understanding motorcade speed is 40 to 45 miles an hour, so it shouldn't be very long before he gets to the seminary, where he will be having lunch at that point.
And also at the seminary, isn't that where there will be a longhorn steer awaiting him? Not for lunch, but to be viewed.
It's on the grounds, and it's my understanding that it's placed in such a way that when he leaves the seminary on that parade, he will see the longhorn steer and a little bit of Texas heritage there. We were talking to John Kirby a minute ago about the Catholic Charities Convention. They do this convention annually, but normally they don't have anywhere near the number of participants attending the convention as they do this year. I think it more than doubled or maybe even tripled their attendance. They expect to have about 4,500 in the auditorium for the Pope's remarks. They'll be presenting a 10-minute film there, and then the Pope will speak to them about good works and charity.
Judging by what I can see, it does not look like it has taken very long at all for the worshipers to vacate the Westover Hills Mass site. Naturally, as Lisa and Hollis were telling us, many of them left right after the homily. It was very hot, and now the rest of them are leaving.
Is Lisa or Hollis available that we might speak to them out there? Oh, they've already apparently broken down for a minute. It was my understanding that they were to have had post-Mass entertainment out there, but that was deleted in the interests of complying with the Texas Mass Gathering Act. They had to get this gathering done with in a period of 12 hours for the number of people that they had. There is a statute in Texas law that requires that they have certain insurance and meet certain requirements if the meeting was to have gone on longer than 12 hours with as many people as showed up. And we're hearing that 200,000 people showed up. Here's a helicopter shot of the motorcade as it makes its way out onto what looks to be Highway 151 there, although I'm not really familiar enough with the terrain. That light area you see in the center of the screen will be the Northwest Freeway when they finally get it paved, and Highway 151 is what amounts to an access road for that major highway. Right now, however, it is the highway out in that part of the woods.
We've heard an awful lot about traffic congestion related to the Mass. Fortunately, that has all been taken care of for the Pope. He will hopefully not encounter any type of traffic tie-up so that he can stay to his schedule.
I think that's Petranco and 151 there, looks like to me. And you can see one of the parking lots. Sorry to interrupt you, Deborah.
Oh, no, that's all right. The folks who have been at the Mass are walking at this point, most of them, walking back to where they have parked their cars if they drove themselves, walking back to the park and pickup sites, and we'll see if that elaborate color-coded system really did work.
And here are some of the faithful pilgrims now. I noted earlier on the shots of the grounds themselves that there was quite a bit of refuse remaining on the ground. That will be a major chore, picking up all of the debris and trash that is left over after the Mass, and is obviously going to be part of the $2.5 million that it is costing to stage that event. About half of that figure, $2.5 million, a little over $1 million goes for the Mass, the preparations, and of course the cleanup to return the field to what it was before all of this hoopla started. A grand celebration.
Which wasn't much before it all started. They've got to get it looking back to looking like nature again. You know, watching the folks walk back, you can't help but think that getting there is half the fun, getting back is not the other half. We're going to take a break, I understand, and then resume our continuous coverage of the Pope's visit to San Antonio. We hope you've been with us up to this point, and we hope you will stay with us. We've got lots more to come.